Your Bible has a woman in it who gets 11 words and then disappears forever. Genesis chapter 4, verse 22. Go look while I talk. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. That is it. That is the whole thing. No age, no husband, no children, no death, nothing before it and nothing after. A genealogy that skipped every other sister in 6 generations, stopped and wrote her name down, and then said nothing else about her. Tonight I am counting every woman Genesis names and never explains. Now, I want you to understand why that clause is strange, because on a quick read, it just looks like part of a list. It is not. Go back up the chapter and count. Cain has a son. That son has a son. Down through 6 generations of the line of Cain. And the text names father after father after father, and never once stops to tell you about a daughter or a sister. Not one. Then it gets to a man named Tubal-Cain, who works brass and iron, and it says, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Somebody put that in on purpose. In a document where the whole organizing logic is fathers and sons, a sister does not fall in by accident. Somebody knew her name and thought it belonged on the page, and then said nothing else, ever. Here is what tonight is. I am going to walk the book of Genesis and stop at every woman the text names, and then leave standing there unexplained. And I am also going to keep a second column for the ones the text puts in a scene and refuses to name at all, because those are just as loud. Chapter and verse on every single one. And everything I read tonight comes out of one book you already own, with one verse from Luke at the very end. And let me tell you plainly what this is not, because there are 100 videos out there that would take this same list and go somewhere I am not going. This is not a secret. Nobody removed these women. There is no lost chapter that explains them, and if somebody hands you one, ask them for the manuscript. Tonight is about the silences themselves, and about what it means that this book keeps writing down names it never bothers to explain. The finding at the end is not what my title promised. It turns on 3 words. The Lord himself said in the Gospel of Luke, about a woman in tonight's list who does not have a name at all. I am holding that until you have met all of them. Here is the rule I am working under, and you can hold me to every word of it for the next hour. A woman goes on tonight's list if the text does one of 2 things. Either it gives her a name, or it puts her in a scene where something happens, and then it gives no account of who she was or what became of her. That is the whole test. I am keeping 2 columns. Column 1 is the named and unexplained. Column 2 is the ones who appear, act, and are never named at all. Everything comes out of Genesis. One book. You do not need a library. You do not need a Gears manuscript. You do not need anything I own that you do not. At the very end, I will read one verse from the Gospel of Luke, and that is the only time I leave the book. Now the thing I will not do, and this is the most important minute in this segment. I am not going to fill a silence with a story. There are traditions about several of these women. Old ones, some Jewish, some Christian, written down centuries after Genesis was already Genesis. When one of them is relevant, I will tell you it exists, and I will tell you it is a tradition, and I will tell you roughly when it shows up. And then I will leave it right there and go back to the text. It does not get promoted into the column where the citations live. Because here is the thing about gaps, and I say this as a man who spent 4 years reading alone with nobody checking him. A gap is not a door. A gap is a gap. And nearly everything that gets sold to you as the answer to one of these silences was written by somebody who was also guessing, just earlier than you, in a language you cannot check. with a confidence they had not earned either. I have to be honest about why that rule matters to me personally. When I left the church in 2019 and started reading on my own, the gaps were the first thing I went after. I wanted them to mean something. I had a hole where a lot of certainty used to be, and an unexplained woman in Genesis 4 felt like a loose brick I could pull out and find a room behind. I spent the better part of a year pulling on loose bricks. There was no room. What there was, and it took me a while to see it as a gift, was a book honest enough to write down a name it could not explain, instead of inventing something to say about her. I believe that now. I did not believe it then. Now let me tell you how these lists actually work, because if you do not know this, the silences look like malice, and they are not. A genealogy in that world is not history writing the way we mean it. It is closer to a deed. It exists to answer questions a family has to answer. Who inherits this ground? Who is entitled to serve at this altar? Which clan does this man belong to when the tribes camp? A name goes on that list because somebody, generations later, needs to be able to trace a claim through it, which means the lists follow the line that inherits. And in that culture, the line that inherits runs through sons. That is not the Bible endorsing it. That is the Bible recording a property system that existed, the same way it records the price of a field and the weight of a shekel. And I can prove that logic to you out of the Bible itself, because there is one place where the system gets tested, and you can watch exactly what makes a woman's name go into a land record. Numbers, chapter 27. A man named Zelophehad dies in the wilderness, and he has no sons, 5 daughters. And those 5 women walk up to Moses and Eleazar the priest, and the princes, and the whole congregation at the door of the tabernacle, and they make a legal argument. Why should the name of our father be done away from among his family? Because he hath no son. Give unto us a possession among the brethren of our father. And Moses takes the case to God, and the ruling comes back in their favor, and the law gets amended on the spot. If a man die and have no son, then ye shall cause his inheritance to pass unto his daughter. Now here is why I bring that up in a video about Genesis. Those 5 women are named Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah, named in Numbers 26, named again in Numbers 27, named again in Numbers 36, and named one more time in Joshua 17 when they actually collect the land. 4 times. Why? Because in their case the property ran through them. The moment a woman becomes the line of inheritance, the record starts saying her name over and over, because somebody, generations later, is going to need to prove which field belongs to whom. That is the machinery. It is not a judgment about who mattered to God. It is a filing system doing the one job it was built to do. And here is the consequence that matters for tonight. Under that logic, almost nobody who ever lived gets into one of these lists. Not most sons, not most daughters, not most anybody. So when a woman does appear, she is already an exception. And the exception is exactly what we are counting. And let me put a number on how late those traditions are, because vague words like later do a lot of hiding. Genesis reaches the shape we read it in a very long time before the Common Era. The Jewish traditions people quote about these particular women mostly turn up in writings from the first few centuries after Christ, and some of the material that circulates online is medieval. That is a gap of 1,000 years or more between the silence and the explanation. 1,000 years. Think about what that means. Somebody writing in that period was in exactly the position you and I are in tonight. They had the same 11 words about Naamah that you have. They were not remembering. They were reasoning, and sometimes they were storytelling, and the honest ones among them said so. 2 fences before I read the first one, and they are the same two I put up every time. Nothing tonight is a bloodline claim. Nothing in this hour says anybody's blood carries something somebody else's does not. Nothing ranks believers by ancestry, and nobody's standing before God moves an inch based on any of it. And nothing tonight is a cult instruction or date setting. I say that on every video, and I'm going to keep saying it, because there is a whole industry out there taking material like this and running it somewhere I will not follow. King James, unless I tell you otherwise. Here is how I read it. You may read it different, and that is fine. Check me as I go. Column 1, entries 1 and 2, Ada and Zillah. Genesis chapter 4, verse 19. And Lamech took unto him 2 wives. The name of the one was Ada, and the name of the other was Zillah. The name of the one was. The name of the other was. That construction is how the Hebrew flags something worth writing down. It is the same phrasing the book uses when it introduces men who matter. And these are the only 2 wives named in the entire line of Cain. 6 generations of it. Now look at what happens around them, because their sons carry the whole reason this passage exists. Verse 20. And Ada bare Jabal. He was the father of such as dwell in tents, and of such as have cattle. That is the origin of the herding life, traced back to one woman's son. Verse 21. And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all such as handle the harp and the organ. Music. Every instrument in every temple and every juke joint on every corner, traced back through Ada. Verse 22. And Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. Metalwork. Tools and blades and cooking pots and plow tips, the whole material world of that era, traced through Zillah. Sit with that for a second. In 4 verses, this passage tells you where herding came from, where music came from, and where metalworking came from. 3 foundations of human civilization, and the text routes every one of them through a named mother. Ada's 2 boys, Zillah's boy. And then it tells you nothing else about either woman for the rest of the Bible. Nobody knows where they came from. Nobody knows what happened to them. They do not die on the page. They do not speak on the page, and no later writer in either testament ever mentions them again. 2 women whose sons the text credits with inventing the tent, the harp, and the forge, and they get 1 clause apiece. Now here is the part almost nobody notices, and it is the strangest thing in the chapter. The very first poem in the Bible is addressed to these 2 women, by name, twice. Genesis 4, verse 23. And Lamech said unto his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech, hearken unto my speech. For I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. Verse 24. If Cain shall be avenged 7-fold, truly Lamech 70 and 7-fold. Look at the form of it. That is Hebrew poetry, with the parallel lines doubling back on each other, and it is the oldest piece of verse in the book. Before the song at the sea, before anything David wrote, before Job, the first poetry in Scripture. And what is it? A man standing in front of his 2 wives, naming them both, demanding they listen, and boasting that he killed somebody over an injury, and that his revenge will run 10 times harder than the protection God put on Cain. He calls them by name, Ada and Zillah. Then he calls them again, ye wives of Lamech. He wants their attention specifically. Hear my voice. Hearken unto my speech. They do not answer. Not 1 word. The poem ends. The chapter moves on to Adam and Eve having another son, and those 2 women are done in Scripture forever. I have read that passage a lot of times over the last few years, and I still cannot get past it. The first time this book records a man making art, he is using it to threaten, and the audience he demands is 2 women whose names we know, and whose voices we will never hear. Entry 3. Naamah. And now that you have seen the shape of that chapter, the clause about her lands differently. Genesis 4 verse 22. Read whole. And Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Read what her brothers got. Jabal, the father of such as dwell in tents. Jubal, the father of all such as handle the harp and the organ. Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. 3 men, 3 occupations, 3 lines of descent that the text says are still running. And then the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. She gets a name and a relationship. That is more than the daughters in Genesis 5 get, who are summed up as sons and daughters, and left in the plural. And it is less than any of the 3 men in her own verse get, because she has no occupation, no descendants, no story. Her name means something pleasant, agreeable, in Hebrew. That is a fact about the word, and I am not going to build anything on it, because plenty of people in that book have names that describe nothing about their lives. So why is she in there? I have 4 possible answers, and I do not know which is right, and I want you to hear me not knowing. 1. She was famous for something in the world of whoever wrote this down, and the name alone was enough to trigger the story for the original reader. 2. She carried a line that mattered to somebody keeping records, and the rest of that record did not survive into this text. 3. The writer was preserving a complete family unit rather than only the productive males, and this is the one place it shows. 4. We have no idea, and the writer had a reason he did not explain because he was not writing for us. I lean toward the first one, that she was known. Genealogies do not usually name people at random, and a name with nothing attached usually means the audience did not need it attached. But I would not put $1 on it, and anybody who tells you flatly which of those 4 it is has left the evidence behind. Now the tradition, and I said I would name these when they came up. There is old Jewish speculation about Naamah, and one strand of it identifies her as the wife of Noah. You will find that repeated online with a great deal of confidence. Here is what you need to know. It appears in rabbinic writing well over 1,000 years after Genesis was already Genesis. It is one opinion among several recorded in the same sources, and Genesis itself never names Noah's wife at all. She is the wife of Noah and his sons' wives, and that is the whole description across the entire flood account. So a tradition solved a silence by borrowing a name out of another silence 4 verses earlier. I understand the impulse. I have felt the impulse. It is not evidence, and I am not passing it to you as evidence. And here is the check I ran before I put this segment together. Because somebody always asks whether the missing part is in a different version. It is not. The Greek translation of Genesis made in Egypt centuries before Christ has the same clause and nothing more. The Samaritan text has the same clause. The Dead Sea material does not hand us a longer version of Genesis 4, and no manuscript anybody has found adds a single word about who Naamah was. That matters because it rules out the version of this story where a fuller account existed and got taken out. There is no evidence of a fuller account. As far as every copy we possess goes, that verse has been 11 words about a woman for as long as there have been copies, which is a different situation than something being hidden. And I want you to feel the difference. Hidden means somebody had it. This looks like nobody had it, going all the way back. 3 entries down. Ada, Genesis 4 verse 19. Zillah, Genesis 4 verse 19. Naamah, Genesis 4 verse 22. Named, consequential, unexplained, all 3 in a single chapter about the line everybody skips. Now column 2, and the first entry in it is the most famous unanswered question in the whole Bible. Genesis chapter 4 verse 17. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. And he builded a city, and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. And Cain knew his wife. No name, no introduction, no sentence anywhere before it saying where she came from, or when they met, or who her people were. She appears in the middle of a clause. She conceives. She bears a son, and the sentence keeps going and starts talking about city planning. Every child in every Sunday school in this country has asked about her. Where did Cain get a wife? I asked it myself in Birmingham when I was about 8 years old, in a basement classroom with those little folding chairs. And I remember the answer I got, which was a look and a change of subject. I have been in rooms since where grown men got the same look for asking. So let me do the thing nobody did for me and just handle it honestly. First, what the text actually supplies, because it does supply something and almost nobody reads far enough to find it. Genesis chapter 5, verse 4. And the days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters, plural, both. 800 years of them, and the text does not name a single one. Then it does the same thing for Seth in verse 7, and Enos in verse 10, and Canaan in verse 13, and every man in that chapter. And he begat sons and daughters. 10 times, 10 generations, the same formula. So Genesis does tell you there were other children. It tells you 10 times in one chapter. It just never names one of them, and it certainly never stops to introduce the specific woman Cain married. And the wife is not the only unexplained thing in that verse. Read the second half of it again. And he builded a city, and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. He built a city. A city needs people. It needs somebody to wall it, somebody to live in it, somebody to feed it. Genesis says, a man who has just been driven out for killing his brother builds a city, and it does not tell you who filled it, and it does not seem to think that is a question. Same chapter, verse 14. Cain says to God, I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth, and it shall come to pass that every one that findeth me shall slay me. Every one that findeth me. He is afraid of people. Which people? The text does not say, and it does not treat his fear as unreasonable either. Verse 15, the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. A protective mark, given because there are others out there who might find him. So inside one chapter you have a wife with no origin, a city with no citizens, and a crowd of unnamed people Cain is frightened of. Those are not 3 separate puzzles. That is one silence with 3 faces, and Genesis 5 verse 4 is the closest the book comes to acknowledging it, in 5 words about sons and daughters. That is the plain reading. Take it for exactly what it is worth, and no more. It does not resolve every question a careful person can raise about that chapter, and I am not going to stand here and pretend it does. There are hard questions in Genesis 4 about timing, and about who Cain was afraid of when he said, everyone that findeth me shall slay me. I do not have all of that worked out, and the people who claim they do are usually selling a book. Here is where I have landed on the whole business, and it took me a while to get comfortable with it. Genesis is not answering my questions. It is not built to. It is a book following one promise through one family, from a garden to a coffin in Egypt, and it keeps whatever carries that thread and drops everything else. When I finally understood that, a lot of my frustration went away, and I will tell you honestly that some of it did not. There are nights I want the book to tell me more than it tells me. My mother used to say, you cannot make a well deeper by standing over it and complaining. I hear her voice on this one. And do the arithmetic. Genesis 5 hands you, because it is doing quiet work in the background. Adam lived 930 years, Seth 912, Enos 905. Every one of those men, the text says, begat sons and daughters across those centuries. And it says it in exactly the same words every time, like a stamp coming down on a page. 9 centuries of children per man. And the book does not give you one number and does not name one of them. If you want a population count for the world of Genesis 4, it is not in there. Anybody who gives you one has built it themselves out of assumptions. And there are whole shelves of books that do exactly that, and they disagree with each other. And the New Testament had every chance to fill this in and did not. Cain comes up 3 separate times over there. 1 John chapter 3, verse 12. Not as Cain, who was of that wicked one and slew his brother. Jude verse 11. They have gone in the way of Cain. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 4, comparing his offering to Abel's. 3 writers, 3 different letters, all of them assuming their readers know the Cain story cold. And not one of them says a word about his wife, his city, or who he was afraid of. They had the same silence we have, and they were closer to the source than we will ever be, and they left it alone. That tells me something. When people who could have said more do not say more, the odds go up that there was nothing more to say. And notice the pattern that is forming, because we are only 4 entries in and it is already visible. Adar, Zillah, and Naamah get names and no stories. Cain's wife gets a story, a small one, and no name. Both directions of the same silence, in the same chapter, 4 verses apart. That is what tonight is really about. Not one missing woman. A habit. If you are still with me, comment the word silence and tell me which one of these gaps you were handed an answer for growing up. I would like to know what people were told, because half of what I got told as a boy turned out to be somebody's tradition wearing a Bible's coat. Now stay close, because the next 2 women in column 2 do not have names either. And one of them founded a nation whose descendant ends up in the family tree of Jesus. Genesis 19. A house outside Sodom and 3 women in 1 chapter, and not one of them gets a name. Start with the wife, because her verse is the shortest and the loudest. Genesis 19, verse 26. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. That is the entire account. 14 words in the King James. She has been in the chapter before that, in the plural, when the angels take hold of Lot's hand, and his wife's hand, and his 2 daughters' hands to pull them out of the city. But she never speaks. She never gets a name, and her death is 1 clause with no explanation attached to it. Look at what the verse withholds. It does not say why she looked. It does not say what she was thinking. It does not say whether she had family back in those streets, though a woman living in a city that long almost certainly did. It does not say what Lot did when he turned around and she was not walking behind him anymore. I want to slow down on that last part for a second, because the text puts the detail there and then moves on so fast that most readings skip it. From behind him. She was walking behind her husband, which means he did not see it happen. He found out the way people find out, by turning around. And then the narrative leaves her standing there and follows the men to Zoar. Now the 2 daughters, and I am going to handle this chapter carefully, because it is one of the ugliest in the Bible, and it does not need any help from me to be disturbing. They are introduced in verse 8 in the worst possible way, when their father offers them to a mob at his own door. The text records it flatly, with no comment, no condemnation, no defense. Genesis does that a lot. It writes down what happened and lets you sit in it. Then in verse 30, the family is in a cave in a mountain. Everything they had is gone. The city is a smoke column behind them, and their mother is dead on the road. Verse 31. And the firstborn said unto the younger, Our father is old, and there is not a man in the earth to come in unto us after the manner of all the earth. Read how they are labeled. The firstborn, the younger. That is what the text calls them for the entire episode, from verse 30 to verse 38. Not names, birth order. What they do next is what the chapter is infamous for, and I am not going to walk through the details of it, because I do not think a camera needs to linger there, and because the text itself gets through it in 4 verses. They get their father drunk on 2 consecutive nights, and both of them conceived by him. The text does not praise it. The text does not excuse it. It also does not stop and denounce it, which unsettles people, and I understand why. Genesis reports. It reports Lot at the door in verse 8 the same way, without a word of judgment. If you want the book to editorialize, this is not the chapter that will do it for you. What I will say is what the daughters themselves say, because the writer gave them a line and it is worth hearing. There is not a man in the earth. Whatever else was in that cave, those 2 women believed they were the last of everything, watching the last old man they had left get older, with a plain of ash behind them where the world used to be. That is not a defense. It is the reason they give, and the writer chose to record it. And people went looking for her. That is the part of the reception history I find hard to shake. Josephus, the Jewish historian writing in the 1st century, mentions the pillar of salt and says that he had seen it himself, that it was still standing in his day. Now, I am labeling that clearly as an outside source and not as scripture, and historians have gone back and forth about what he actually saw. That whole region around the Dead Sea is full of salt formations, pillars and spires of it, some of them tall as a person, standing up out of the ground on the southwestern shore. There is a formation on Mount Sodom that guides point at to this day and call by her name. So for 2,000 years, people have been going out to that shore looking for a woman the Bible would not name. They wanted something to stand in front of. I understand that impulse better than I would like to. Now here is where this chapter stops being a horror story and starts being something I cannot stop thinking about. Genesis 19, verse 37. And the firstborn bare a son, and called his name Moab. The same is the father of the Moabites unto this day. Verse 38. And the younger, she also bare a son, and called his name Ben-Ammi. The same is the father of the children of Ammon unto this day. Read who does the naming. And called his name Moab, and called his name Ben-Ammi. Both times the mother names the child. That is the woman's act, recorded in a chapter where the text will not give either woman a name of her own. They name nations, and they go into the record as the firstborn and the younger. And these are not small nations. Moab and Ammon are on the map for the entire rest of the Old Testament. Numbers, when Israel comes up out of the wilderness and has to negotiate passage. Judges, over and over. Kings, in the wars and the treaties. The prophets have whole oracles about both of them. If you read your Bible straight through, you will run into those 2 names 100 times, and every single one of them traces back to a cave in a mountain and 2 women the writer would not name. And then there is Ruth. Ruth chapter 1 verse 4. And they took them wives of the women of Moab. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. Ruth the Moabitess. That is her title through the whole book, said again and again, chapter after chapter, as if the writer wants you never to forget where she came from. Ruth marries Boaz. Ruth 4, verse 17. And they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. And Matthew chapter 1 puts the whole line at the front of the New Testament. Boaz begat Obed of Ruth, and Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David the king. So follow the thread all the way back. David comes through Ruth. Ruth comes out of Moab. Moab comes from a son named by a woman in a cave whose name the book never wrote down. Sit with that a second. I am not going to make it prettier than it is. And I am not going to pretend Genesis 19 is anything other than a bleak chapter about a broken family. But the line runs where it runs, and the text is the one that put those two facts within reach of each other. It says unto this day about Moab in Genesis, and then it says the Moabitess about Ruth 12 times, and then it puts her in the genealogy of the king. 3 entries in column 2 from one chapter. The wife who looked back, Genesis 19 verse 26. The firstborn and the younger, Genesis 19 verse 30 through 38. And I want you to hold the first of those 3, the wife, because she is the one I am coming back to at the end of this hour. She has the shortest verse of anybody we have covered tonight. She is going to have the last word. Back to column 1. And these next 4 live in the margins of chapters most reading plans skip entirely. Entry 4, Keturah, Genesis chapter 25, verse 1. Then again Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah. Sarah is dead. Genesis 23 is her funeral, and the negotiation for the cave at Machpelah. And Genesis 24 is Isaac's marriage to Rebekah. And then chapter 25 opens with this one sentence. Then again Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah. Verse 2. And she bare him Zimran, and Jokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Ishbak, and Shua, 6 sons. Verses 3 and 4 give you their sons after them. So we are 2 generations deep in 4 verses. And one of those 6 is Midian. Stop there, because that name is going to run through the rest of your Bible. The Midianites are the traders who buy Joseph out of the pit in Genesis 37. Midian is where Moses runs to when he flees Egypt, and it is where he marries Zipporah, and it is where the burning bush is. Jethro, the priest of Midian, is Moses' father-in-law and the man who teaches him how to organize a nation in Exodus 18. And Midian is the enemy Gideon fights in Judges. All of that comes out of the woman in Genesis 25 verse 1, and the text gives her one sentence of introduction and never describes her again. No origin, no story, no death scene. Verse 6 says, Abraham gave gifts to the sons of the concubines and sent them away eastward. And that is the last of it. Entry 5. And this one is the strangest verse in tonight's entire video. Genesis chapter 35, verse 8. But Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died, and she was buried beneath Bethel under an oak, and the name of it was called Allon Bahuth. Now read that again, and ask the obvious question. Who is Deborah? She has never appeared before. Not once. Genesis 24, when Rebekah leaves her family to go marry Isaac, mentions that her nurse went with her in one clause, without a name. That is it. That is the only other trace. So this woman traveled with Rebekah out of Padan Aram as a young woman, lived in that household through Isaac and the twins, and the deception, and the years of Jacob being gone. And she is with the family still when Jacob comes back. Decades. And the Bible never says a word about her while she is alive. And then she dies, and the text stops the whole narrative to tell you her name, where they buried her, and what they called the tree. Allon Bahuth. The writer even glosses it for you. The oak of weeping. They cried so hard at that funeral that the tree got a name. I want you to feel the shape of that. A woman gets no lines, no scenes, no description, no husband mentioned, no children mentioned. And then the record stops for one verse, gives her a name at last, and tells you that the place where they laid her got called the Oak of Weeping, and the people still called it that when this was written down. Whatever she was to that family, they could not let her go into the ground unnamed. And I have been to funerals in Birmingham where I learned more about a woman in one afternoon than I had learned in 20 years of seeing her every Sunday. Some people are like that. The record only catches them once. Entry 6. Timnah. And she is in a chapter almost nobody reads on purpose, which is Genesis 36, the line of Esau. Verse 12. And Timnah was concubine to Eliphaz Esau's son, and she bare to Eliphaz Amalek. One verse, and it carries a great deal. Amalek. The Amalekites are the first nation to attack Israel after the Exodus, in Exodus 17. The battle where Moses holds up his hands and Aaron and Hur have to prop his arms. They come back in Numbers, in Judges, in 1 Samuel, where they are the reason Saul loses the kingdom. Haman in the book of Esther is called an Agagite, which readers have long connected back to that same people. And the woman at the head of that line gets one verse in a chapter of Esau's descendants. Then look at verse 22 of the same chapter. And the children of Lotan were Hori and Hemam, and Lotan's sister was Timnah. There she is again, named twice in one chapter. And the second mention uses the exact same construction the book used for Naamah back in chapter 4. Lotan's sister was Timnah, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Same move, 32 chapters apart. A genealogy running through men stops and says, and the sister was. Entry 7, and this one is 3 women in one verse, Genesis 36 verse 39. And Baal-Hanan the son of Achbor died, and Hadar reigned in his stead. And the name of his city was Pau, and his wife's name was Mehetabel, the daughter of Matred, the daughter of Mezahab. That is a king list. Kings of Edom, one after another, each with a city, each dying and being replaced. And in the middle of it, the record stops and gives you a queen's name, her mother's name, and her grandmother's name. Mehetabel, Matred, Mezahab. 3 generations of women in one verse, in a list about kings, and not one word of explanation for any of them. This is the verse that broke my theory, and I want to tell you about it because I think how a man handles the evidence that hurts him tells you whether to trust the rest of what he says. I had a clean explanation going into this study. Genealogies are property records. They track inheritance. Inheritance runs through sons. Women appear only when the property runs through them. That is tidy, and it is mostly right. And I said it to you 20 minutes ago in good faith. Then I hit Genesis 36 verse 39, sitting at my kitchen table in Atlanta with the lamp on. And there is a queen, and her mother, and her grandmother in a king list, and not one of them carries anything. No land moves through them. No claim depends on them. There is no reason for them to be there under my theory, and they are there anyway. I sat back in that chair, and I said out loud, well, there goes that. And I left it in tonight, instead of quietly cutting it, because I believe this. I have sat with it a long time. A theory that only survives when you skip verses is not a theory, it is a preference. Entry 8, and she is the loudest silence in the book because she gets an entire chapter. Dinah. Genesis 34 opens with her going out to see the daughters of the land. And what happens to her happens in verse 2, and I am not going to dramatize it. She is assaulted. And then read the rest of that chapter and count her lines. Shechem speaks. Hamor speaks, at length, to Jacob and then to his own townsmen. Jacob's sons speak, and they speak deceitfully. The text says so. Jacob speaks at the end, and what he says is about his own reputation among the Canaanites. Simeon and Levi speak the last line of the chapter, and it is a question. Should he deal with our sister as with an harlot? 31 verses. Every man in that chapter gets dialogue. Some of them get speeches. Dinah says nothing. Not one word. From beginning to end. The chapter is named after what happened to her, and she is silent in every verse of it. She is named, and that matters, and I am putting her in column 1. But everything the chapter tells you about her is what other people did and what other people said about it. Let me read both columns back, and then I will tell you what I think the silence is. Column 1. the named and unexplained. Ada, Genesis 4, verse 19. Mother of the herding life and of music. Zillah, Genesis 4, verse 19. Mother of metalworking. Naamah, Genesis 4, verse 22. 11 words. Keturah, Genesis 25, verse 1. 6 sons, one of them Midian, 1 sentence of introduction. Deborah, Genesis 35, verse 8. Named only in the verse where she dies, under a tree they call the Oak of Weeping. Timnah, Genesis 36, verses 12 and 22. Named twice, mother of Amalek. Mehetabel, and Matred, and Mezahab. Genesis 36, verse 39. 3 generations of women in 1 verse of a king list. And Dinah, Genesis 34. A whole chapter, and not 1 word of dialogue. That is 9 names in column 1. Column 2, described and never named. Cain's wife, Genesis 4, verse 17. Lot's wife, Genesis 19, verse 26. Lot's 2 daughters, called the firstborn and the younger through 9 verses, Genesis 19, verses 30 through 38. And both of them, mothers of nations still on the map in the prophets. 4 in column 2. 13 women, 1 book, and I could have made the list longer. I left out Noah's wife and his sons' wives, who ride out the end of the world in a box and are never named. I left out Potiphar's wife, who gets a whole scene and no name. I left out the midwives and the servants and the daughters in the plural in Genesis 5 and 11. So 13 is the conservative count, and the honest count is that I stopped counting. Now why? The best explanation I have, and I have held it a long time, is that Genesis is not a history of a world. It is the history of a promise. Follow the shape of the book. It starts wide, with creation and the whole human race, and then it narrows fast. By chapter 12, it is 1 man and 1 family. By chapter 25, it is 1 son out of 2. By chapter 28, it is 1 grandson out of 2. By the end, it is 12 brothers in Egypt and a coffin waiting to be carried home. The book is a funnel, and a funnel keeps what goes through it. So the text preserves what carries the promise forward. Who inherited? Who was born to whom? Which field was bought, and for how much silver, and from which man, in front of how many witnesses? It records the covenant scenes at length, and it records the land transactions with the precision of a deed, because those are the things the story runs on. And everything else gets the shortest possible treatment, or none at all. Not because those lives did not matter, because the writer was not keeping that ledger. And you can measure the funnel with your thumb. Genesis has 50 chapters. The whole world, from creation to the tower, takes 11 of them. Then 1 family takes the other 39. 11 chapters for everybody who ever lived, and 39 for Abraham's household. Now put that next to what the book does spend words on, because the contrast is the argument. Genesis chapter 23 is the purchase of a burial plot. That is the whole chapter. Sarah dies, and Abraham goes to the sons of Heth, and there is a negotiation at the gate of the city, and Ephron the Hittite offers the field, and Abraham insists on paying, and the price is named. 400 shekels of silver, current money with the merchant, and the text records the field, and the cave that was in it, and all the trees that were in the field, and in all the borders round about. And it says, the whole thing was made sure unto Abraham in the presence of the children of Heth, before all that went in at the gate of his city. 20 verses on a real estate closing. Every party named, the price named, the boundaries described, the witnesses noted. That is a book that knows how to be precise when precision serves the purpose. So when the same book gives a woman 11 words, that is not a writer who could not be bothered. That is a writer keeping a different ledger than the one we wish he had kept. That explanation covers most of tonight. It covers the daughters in the plural in Genesis 5. It covers why Noah's wife has no name and why Cain's wife has no origin. It covers the whole architecture of the thing, and I believe it. I want to say that clearly before I turn around and show you where it breaks, because the next thing I am going to do is take my own explanation apart, and I do not want you to think I was ever pretending it was worthless. Here is where the explanation breaks. If Genesis only kept what carried the promise, then a whole set of tonight's verses should not exist. Naamah does not carry the promise. She is in the line of Cain, which the book is about to drown, and she has no descendants named and no function in the plot. Under a strict record-keeping theory, she should not be on the page. She is on the page. Timnah does not carry the promise. She is a concubine in Esau's line. In the chapter that exists mainly to close out the family, Genesis is not following. Under my theory, she gets nothing. She gets named twice. Mehetabel and her mother and her grandmother do not carry anything at all. Nobody's inheritance runs through an Edomite queen's grandmother. That verse is pure surplus. And Deborah the nurse is the one that finishes my theory off. She owns nothing. She inherits nothing. She transmits nothing. She is somebody's nurse who traveled with a bride and got old in the household. And when she died, the record stopped, gave her a name it had never given her in life, and told you they cried enough to name the tree. And there is a fifth counterexample, the largest one in the book, and I should say it out loud even though she is not on tonight's list. Hagar, an Egyptian servant woman with no standing, no property, and no claim on anything in that household. Under a strict inheritance record theory, she rates a clause, the way Cain's wife got a clause. Instead, she gets scenes. A conversation at a spring in Genesis 16, another one out in the wilderness in Genesis 21, a promise spoken over her son, and an angel who calls her by name twice. And in chapter 16, verse 13, she does something nobody else in the whole Bible does. She gives God a name. Thou God seest me. She is not on tonight's list precisely because the book explains her. That is the point. When Genesis wants to tell you about a woman with no legal standing whatsoever, it plainly knows how, and it does it at length, and it does it beautifully, which makes every silence on tonight's list a little harder to write off as just the system doing what systems do. 5 counterexamples, and I did not have to hunt for any of them. They are in the same chapters as everything else. So something in this book keeps reaching past what the ledger required. I cannot fully account for that, and I am not going to pretend I can. What I will say is that whoever assembled Genesis had a habit of writing down more people than his own system needed. And that habit is the reason we know Naamah existed at all. Now the last thing, and this is what the whole hour was built for. Of all 13 women I read you tonight, the one with the least is Lot's wife. 14 words in the King James, no name, no speech, no burial, and a chapter that walks away from her mid-sentence. Turn to Luke chapter 17. Jesus is talking about the day of judgment, the suddenness of it, the way ordinary life will be running right up until the moment it is not. He mentions Noah and the flood. He mentions Lot and Sodom. And then in verse 32 he says 3 words. Remember Lot's wife. Remember Lot's wife. And read what is on either side of those 3 words, because the setting makes them sharper. Verse 31. In that day, he which shall be upon the housetop, and his stuff in the house, let him not come down to take it away. And he that is in the field, let him likewise not return back. Let him not return back. That is the instruction. Do not go back for your things. Then verse 32. Remember Lot's wife. Then verse 33. Whosoever shall seek to save his life shall lose it, and whosoever shall lose his life shall preserve it. So she is standing in the middle of a warning about turning around, between an instruction and a principle, as the single illustration he reaches for. Not Sodom, not Lot, not the fire, her. Sit with that a second. Sit with it a long second. He does not say her name because there is no name to say. Nobody wrote it down. And he tells his disciples to remember her anyway. You cannot look her up. You cannot find her genealogy. You cannot find her father's house. You cannot find one line she ever spoke. The record kept the least about her of anybody we covered. And the Lord himself stops in the middle of teaching about the end of the world to say, remember that woman. Which means the record is not the last word on who is remembered. It never was. It was only ever a set of scrolls kept by people with limited hides and one job. And the God those scrolls are about was not working off their filing system. So here is the sentence. And if you take nothing else out of tonight, take this one. A name the record left out is not a person God forgot. Say that to somebody Sunday, and you will have handed them the whole hour in 10 words. And let me close the fences I opened at the start, because I said I would. Nothing tonight was a hidden bloodline, and nothing tonight is a secret history. Nobody removed these women, and every manuscript we have shows the same silences in the same places. This does not rank anybody, it does not make anybody chosen, and it does not move one soul closer to God or further away. What it does is smaller, and I think it is enough. It tells you what kind of book this is. Honest enough to write down a name it could not explain. And it tells you what kind of God the book is describing. One who tells you to remember a woman whose name nobody bothered to keep. Let me read the addresses back one last time, short, so you carry the page and not just the feeling. Genesis 4, verse 19. Ada and Zillah, named in the line of Cain. Genesis 4, verse 22. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Genesis 4, verse 17. And Cain knew his wife, no name given. Genesis 5, verse 4. And he begat sons and daughters, the formula repeated 10 times, and nobody named. Genesis 19, verse 26. His wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Genesis 19, verses 30 through 38. The firstborn and the younger, and the 2 nations they named. Genesis 25, verse 1. Then again Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah. Genesis 34. Dinah, an entire chapter, not one word. Genesis 35, verse 8. Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, and the oak of weeping. Genesis 36, verses 12 and 22. Timnah, named twice. Genesis 36, verse 39. Mehetabel, Matred, Mezahab. And Luke chapter 17, verse 32. Remember Lot's wife. 13 women, 12 addresses in one book, and 1 sentence from the Lord at the end. 9 of them named and left unexplained. 4 of them put into a scene and never named at all. Every address on that page is checkable tonight, in whatever Bible is closest to your chair, in about 20 minutes, without needing one thing from me. If you are still with me at this hour, let me say the honest part the way I would, across a kitchen table. I did not expect this one to land on me the way it did. I built the list thinking it would be an interesting hour about how ancient records work. And it is that. And then I got to Luke 17, verse 32, at about 1 in the morning and had to put the pen down. My mother has been gone a while now. She taught Sunday school in Birmingham for 30-some years, and I could not tell you the name of one person who wrote down a single thing she did in that basement. There is no record of it anywhere. I believe there is a remembering that does not run on paper. That is not a doctrine I can hand you with a citation. It is where I have landed, and I have sat with it a long time. Now here is what I still will not say, even at the end, with all of it on the table. I will not fill any of those gaps with a tradition and hand it to you as scripture. The traditions exist. Some of them are old and thoughtful. And everyone I mentioned tonight I labeled when I mentioned it. They stay in their own column. I will not tell you anything was removed. There is no manuscript evidence that anything was removed, and I checked before I made this. And the Greek and the Samaritan and everything from the desert show the same silences in the same places. Somebody selling you a deleted chapter about these women should be asked for the shelf mark. I will not turn any of this into a claim about anybody's ancestry, and I will not set a date on anything, and I will not tell you a canon or a lineage saves a soul, because none of them do. What I have given you tonight is one telling. Scripture invites us into the story, and this is my way through it after a lot of years of reading alone, and then reading with other people, and the text is deeper than any retelling of it can hold, mine included. I quoted the King James all evening unless I said otherwise. Everything except the last verse came out of one book you already own. When I brought in something from outside, the historian on the pillar of salt, the traditions about Nama, the dating of, when those traditions were written, I said out loud that it came from outside, so you always knew which was which. And when my own explanation broke on Genesis 36, I told you it broke instead of walking around it. And I want to leave you with the habit rather than the list, because the list will fade by Thursday and the habit will not. Slow down in the joints. That is the whole method. When the text pauses to name somebody it did not have to name, stop there. When it gives you a place name and then tells you what the place name means, like the Oak of Weeping, stop there. Because a writer only glosses a word when he wants you to feel it. When a chapter is full of speeches and one person in it never speaks, notice who. None of that requires Hebrew. None of it requires a commentary. It requires you to read at about half the speed you normally read, with something to write with, and to be willing to sit in a gap instead of filling it. That is what I have got. 30 years of Sundays did not teach me that. 4 years alone at a kitchen table with a lamp and a legal pad did. And I would rather hand you the method than the conclusions, because the conclusions are mine and the method is yours. So here is the reading for this week, and it will cost you about 20 minutes. Read Genesis chapter 4, the whole thing, slowly. Then Genesis chapter 19, the whole thing. And I will warn you, it is a hard chapter, and you should read it in the daylight. And do this while you read. Keep a pencil in your hand, and put a small mark in the margin every time a woman appears, named or not. That is the entire assignment. When you get to the end of those 2 chapters, count your marks. I think the number is going to be higher than you expect. It was for me, and I had been reading those chapters for 40 years before I ever counted. And then, if you want the part that changed the whole thing for me, read Luke 17 verses 26 through 32 out loud. It is 7 verses, and it takes a minute, and the last 3 words of it are the reason this video exists. Let me speak something over you before I put this down. If you have spent your life doing work that nobody wrote down, in a kitchen or a plant or a church basement or a hospital room at 3 in the morning, and you have wondered whether any of it is on file anywhere, tonight is for you. The book you own is honest about its own gaps. It kept a name it could not explain, and it stopped a whole narrative to tell you a nurse died and a family cried under a tree. And the Lord himself, teaching about the last day, pointed at a woman with no name at all and said, "Remember her. May God keep what you have done, including the parts no one recorded. May he give you patience with a book that does not answer every question you bring to it. And may that go for every soul hearing this, in every house and every nation, because a blessing that only covers some of us is not one I know how to pray." Amen. One more thing before I turn this lamp off. Tell me which of the 13 you had never noticed, and tell me which silence you want me to sit with next. Because I read the comments, and most of what I end up studying starts right there. Subscribe if you want to be here when I do it. Walk remembered and walk forward. One last thing before you go. This is how I read scripture, not a prophetic word. I quote from the King James Version unless I say otherwise. If you read it differently, I want to hear it. Drop your thought in the comments.